Welcome to the Good Practice interview. Today we're speaking to Julie Starr about some of the key aspects of coaching, including the skills required to be a good coach, what it means to be non-directive in a coaching conversation, and the advice Julie has for managers who are required to provide coaching for the first time. I began the interview by asking Julie how she defines coaching.
Coaching is a conversation. The thing that distinguishes coaching is the effect it has on the other person. It helps them to think through their situations. It helps them to get clear about their situations. And ultimately, it affects their thinking and their learning and their decision-making processes in a situation. And ultimately, it helps somebody to act.
How would you distinguish coaching from mentoring or counselling?
Coaching is essentially about things getting better, about having a solution focus, about looking to what could be improved. And sometimes that means looking at what's going on right now. I think counselling tends to lean back a little bit more, look more towards the past, about why things are like they are and how things have been. Now, the mentor is interested more distinctly in the content of a conversation, and a mentor is more likely to have relevant experience or skills or qualification in that regard. Now, to be a really great mentor, it really helps if you have great listening skills, great questioning skills, and understand the structure of a generative conversation. So I would say a mentor would hopefully be a good coach. A good coach sometimes needs to be a little bit more directive in a conversation according to some boundaries, and so it's also useful for them to have a mentoring perspective.
In what situations might coaching not be an appropriate form of development?
Coaching rests on the coach's ability to be less directive in a conversation, so to surface thoughts and ideas from the other person through a process of asking questions, giving summaries, making observations, and perhaps giving feedback. What coaching cannot do, what a less directive posture in a conversation cannot do, is surface knowledge that isn't there. If you don't know how to operate a video recorder, for example, it's pointless me asking you how you think you're going to approach, operating that piece of equipment. However, if you are in a situation where, I don't know, perhaps you're forming a project at work or you're thinking about approaching a difficult meeting, then I can coach you. The other situations where it's less appropriate to coach somebody in a less directive way is when perhaps that individual is under extreme pressure, or perhaps they are less confident around a situation. This isn't always true, but generally, if somebody was stressed and upset, let's say, around a situation, listening to them might be productive. Putting what might be construed as additional pressure for them to think productively in a situation, again, it might be less helpful. When we're under stress, we tend to be able to think less clearly, make decisions less easily, and generally we need more support.
For you, Julie, what makes a good coach?
The skills of coaching, building rapport and relationship with individuals, understanding the structure and process of a generative conversation, understanding how to ask effective questions, understanding how to listen and different levels of listening, understanding how to give feedback in a constructive way, and operating from these underlying beliefs and principles of a coach. Those skills are probably always relevant in any form of developing people. If somebody wants to go beyond an average level of competence, let's say, with these coaching behaviours, I think what you're engaging there is in your own self-development. So your own self-awareness, understanding what you typically bring to conversations and who you are in conversations, and how a lot of the time it's appropriate to simply get yourself out of the way as coach in a conversation, to remember that you are a channel, a vessel, a conduit for the conversation, that the conversation comes through you. And that's what makes a good coach, somebody that's willing to take it on in terms of who they're being for people and recognizing the service of being a coach.
What steps can managers who coach take to develop their own coaching skills?
I think it's very easy for managers to start coaching. I think what's unfortunate about coaching is there's quite a lot of mysticism and mystique and models and techniques and theories that surround it. But actually, if managers simply started with the idea of how much do I tell people what to do? How often am I giving instruction and being directive in a conversation? And how often do I sit back? Do I listen? Do I help people think for themselves in a conversation? Just that simple idea might bring about a self-awareness that has them do something different in a conversation. It might be something really simple like not speaking as quickly or using more space between one person finishing what they're saying and them perhaps adding their own ideas. From there, we can build these more, let's say, sophisticated behaviours of asking open questions, asking simple open questions, being able to listen from nothing, let's say. So instead of listening with a hypothesis for a situation or listening for an opportunity to be able to fix what we're hearing, but more being able to listen with an attitude of how is the person in front of me able to sort this for themselves? How much can I coach the person in this conversation rather than coach this issue? That's a more sophisticated level of skill, and it demands more self-awareness and it demands more experience and practice, but it's within reach of a busy manager.
You've written about how a coach's ego can affect the success of coaching. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
We all have ego. It's a human thing. It's our sense of who we are, how we are, what we're like, what we're not like. It's those labels that we attach to ourselves that give us a sense of identity. You can imagine if a manager is used to being the person who has all the solutions, has the answers, is able to make the decisions, and that's how they are valued and that's how they think they are successful and what they're recognized for, then if we ask them to sit on their hands a little bit in conversation and ask people what they think, ask them for their thoughts about what's important, then that might start to challenge them at this more identity level of, well, what value am I adding? And that's how we start to get these false barriers and these false limits to a manager or a coach's ability to adopt the appropriate posture and perspective and behaviours during a coaching conversation.
So, what can managers do to overcome these barriers and become less directive in a coaching conversation?
A manager must first start to develop a level of self-awareness to understand what's my typical posture in a situation and what do I need to stop doing or do less of in order to allow these other postures of allowing people to decide and think for themselves. And it might be something really simple like speak less, listen more. It might be don't automatically speak into silence. It might be allow somebody to continue talking before perhaps interrupting them. Or write down 5 really great, simple, open questions and be determined to use them in the meetings that they attend that day.
Do you think managers should ever coach their direct reports?
It rests on the self-awareness and self-management of the individual. So how much can I take off my manager's hat and simply listen to you without having an agenda for what you say or how you say it? I think it also depends on what we're talking about. So if we are talking about a task, a project, work that you have going on, then that might be something that I've got more investment in terms of my agenda, my strategy, what I want to happen. Now, typically, the type of coaching conversations that a manager would be having with a subordinate or a colleague would be the kind that relates to an individual's performance. But I think if we can encourage a manager to focus away from their own agenda in a situation and more onto the agenda of the other person, even in a work-related conversation, then those conversations can be more effective and more productive than if they had asked questions and listened from the manager's agenda, perhaps.
What do you think are the biggest misconceptions about coaching today?
I think there are lots of misconceptions about coaching. The most unfortunate one is that coaching is tea and sympathy or it's cozy chats, and I think none of those has to be true. If you remember what we distinguished as a coaching conversation, it's a conversation that affects the learning, the thoughts, and the behaviour of another person. Now, having a cup of tea and a cozy chat for an hour might do that. And so could a bite-sized conversation in the corridor where somebody just asks you one great question that makes you think and reflect differently on a situation. So in my experience, coaching can be the toughest conversation that somebody has with either a colleague or a client, and the effect those conversations have on an individual can be significant. One of the beliefs and principles that coaching rests on is that the individual is responsible for the results they are generating. Now, sometimes a directive manager, for example, will act from a different posture, which is they are responsible for what's happening with an individual and they need to fix and sort. But when a manager starts to say to somebody, okay, what are you going to have to do to tackle this? What needs to happen? And what might stop you from doing that? That's a deeper, more rigorous level of conversation to have with an individual that can actually be the opposite of a nice, cozy, therapeutic type chat.
What 3 key pieces of advice would you offer to managers who are being asked to coach for the first time?
For any manager who's being asked to coach for the first time, I would say let go of any thought of, there always has to be some eureka impact in a conversation, so that there always has to be some amazing coaching effect that they have on people. Start simply, start by listening, begin by asking some simple open questions that help get the other person off the stands and on the pitch in the conversation. Try the simple perspectives and behaviours that are going to have a coaching effect, and then work up from there. So the more advanced perspectives of understanding the structure of a complete coaching conversation, understanding a sequence of activities during a conversation, understanding, perceptual positions or certain types of purpose-based questioning. Relax on all of those, because that can come in time, and it can come once we've built the foundation for coaching to take place. And the foundation for coaching to take place is awareness of the key principles of allowing people to think and act for themselves, being better at listening, relaxing more in the conversation, having somebody else to do more of the work in the conversation, and then starting to layer in some of these open questions, summaries, making observations rather than giving instruction, and understanding the different ways that they influence during a conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Good Practice interview.